Is there a loud truck? The mail truck. Hi. Welcome back to the Awareness, where I am going to be discussing books and ideas and navigating human life. Yes, the book we are reviewing today is called The Way of Ignorance by Mr. Wendell Berry. Now, I had not read anything by Wendell Berry. I was starting to hear a little bit about him, and then I came across an essay of his called Feminism, the Body, and the Machine in his book, What Are People For? I just so appreciated him right away. He just oozes wisdom. What a good man, salt of the earth in my opinion. And the title can be quite tricky, right? Because you're sitting here and you're like, the way of ignorance. Is he advocating that I willingly stay ignorant? That is the way, you know, because of that ignorance is bliss quote. And then I was like, where does that saying come from? In case you're wondering, it comes from a poem by an English poet named Thomas Gray. Dates back to 1742. In the poem he says, where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. And I believe he was playfully inverting a Bible verse from Ecclesiastes 1:18, which says, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. And that hit home because since 2020, the more that I've dived into learning things and experiencing human behavior in just a different way than before that year, things got significantly harder. You know, I've had a few people very close to me tell me in the last couple years that I've lost my light because I've been searching and trying to understand why certain things happened or were happening, and the chaos that was going on and what it was doing to our world and where it was coming from. And I feel like I've had a proper response at the reality of the scale and the scope of evil that's at play. But when you're driven more by discovering a truth and building a life where truth is honored in a culture that values other things, it can get quite dark, and you can then isolate yourself because things are not the same. We live in a time where we have to think and question things involving psychological data harvesting and information warfare and sophisticated psychological operations being done daily and to the entire population of the planet. Controlled opposition. Who in media can you really trust? We hear about cognitive dissonance, but what about cognitive dominance? These things, people my age in the 90s necessarily weren't having to confront and think about. It was a very different world. There have been multiple Trojan horses we have let into the gates, plus Pandora's box has been opened for a while. And then there's a bunch of genies that have been let out of the bottles that everyone's like interacting with. That's what it is, spirit. That's what it feels like going on. And to be honest, I don't think I actually started to think for myself until 2020 at 30 years old. I really think I was just going along with the conditioning and the programming and the deceitful desires I was following. I was under the influence of those certain ideologies. Those were the things driving my decisions and operating my behavior. So it wasn't until 2020 at 30 years old that I actually was like, wait a second. All right, so let's go back to Wendell. let's get back to the book. It's a compilation of essays. Man, they were so good. Now, this book was published in 2005. So some things are a little dated in the sense that now we've had the shifts that more technology and social media have brought to culture. But the foundational issues that he brings up are still very, very relevant. And the problems that he discusses in this have only gotten bigger and worse. So it's like a timeless piece, this is. But as he states in the book, the great problems call for many small solutions, which is the thing to remember, because the large solutions are probably not going to work, because life is not a one-size-fits-all thing, and B, because the things that have created the large solutions are only interested in profit. So it doesn't ever really solve anything. It just creates more things that need solutions. And they're too large to be bothered with. So it's going to be ordinary people doing beautiful, ordinary, small things that is ultimately going to make the biggest difference. So let's dive into ignorance. Since one of the antidotes to certain types of ignorance, as we get into this, there's a whole variety of kinds of ignorance and also knowledge. And we'll go through some of those. But one of the antidotes to some of the negative forms of ignorance is awareness, which is in line with my channel name. So I found it fitting to discuss this. So I'm not going to go through every single essay, even though they're all really good. But I'm going to start with one called Rugged Individualism, which is very American. I'm just going to read the last two paragraphs, because he starts talking about how conservatives and liberals really, and we know this, they are pretty much the same. They just kind of want different things, but they're kind of two wings of the same bird, right? They've created this two-party system to polarize and keep everything kind of split. Conservative rugged individualists and liberal rugged individualists believe alike that they should be free, quotes, free to get as much as they can of whatever they want. Their major doctrinal difference is that they want, some of the time, different sorts of things. Every man for himself is a doctrine for a feeding frenzy or for a panic in a burning nightclub, appropriate for sharks or hogs or perhaps a cascade of lemmings. A society wishing to endure must speak the language of caretaking, faith-keeping, kindness, neighborliness, and peace. That language is another precious resource that cannot be privatized, right? The government can't incentivize you to do those things. It has to come from your values and what drives you as a human. Said to be able to speak exactly is intimate related to the ability to know exactly, which is why I've had such a hard time speaking, which was one of my main ways of expression. My dad was a motivational speaker. I was always very, I was an actress. Speaking in speech and being comfortable voicing my ideas was always a thing that I could kind of do, until I realized how much I didn't actually know that I was afraid to express, because I'm like, I could just be so incredibly wrong about this. So I got really uncomfortable speaking in certain times, which is something that now, thanks to this channel and me trying to challenge that, I'm trying to overcome. He also said bad precedent is no excuse for bad behavior, which is great. It doesn't really matter what came before. Sure, it plays a part, but there really is no excuse for bad behavior and continuing on with our elaborately rationalized destructions. stick that in your lemon water and drink it. So then he's talking about the loss of the beauty of like a town center, right? I live now in a place where they have maintained charm and character in the little downtown center, because I am so, and I know it's a thing that more people are talking about, how ugly our architecture has gotten. And I know that there's a whole thing going on with the Cracker Barrel rebranding and how just like meh, like anything authentic or charming is just flushed out. What is the difference? The difference is that these old town centers were built by people who were proud of their place and who realized a particular value in living there. The old buildings look good because they were built by people who respected themselves and wanted the respect of their neighbors. The corporate outskirts, on the contrary, were built by people who manifestly take no pride in the place, see no value in the lives lived there, and recognize no neighbors. The only value they see in the place is the money that can be siphoned out of it to more fortunate places. All right, now we're gonna get onto ignorance and the way of ignorance, why the book is named this. So he's not advocating that you stay willfully ignorant and totally annoying. The way of ignorance comes from something by T.S. Eliot, where he says, in order to arrive at what you do not know, you must go by a way which is the way of ignorance. And he starts to break down the different types. And the first one that he talks about is inherent ignorance. Now, this is not a negative thing. This is just sort of a reality, which is the ignorance of all that we cannot know because of the kind of mind we have. So a very limited one. And this includes our ignorance of the past, the real past, not the past that we think we know or we've kind of read about from a distance or from a book sometimes. Because there's so much propaganda, there's so much history that's been rewritten, revisionist history, and things that are the winners kind of write the history. So there's just so much about the past that we actually do not know. And that's, being aware of that is necessary and good. A part of our inherent ignorance, and surely a most formidable encumbrance to those who presume to know the future, is our ignorance of the past. We know almost nothing of our history as it was actually lived. We know little of the lives, even of our parents. We have forgotten almost everything that has happened to ourselves. The easy assumption that we have remembered the most important people and events and have preserved the most valuable evidence is immediately trumped by our inability to know what we have forgotten. I mean, just think about all the stuff in your own life that you've forgotten. It's humbling. So that's the first ignorance, inherent. We all have it, and it ain't going anywhere. Not even the technocrats that are like, we know what's gonna happen in the future by our data and statistics. So number two, materialist ignorance, willful refusal to recognize what cannot be empirically proved. So basically anything involving the mystery of the spiritual realm that we are clearly interacting with all the time. Things that are unexplainable, miracles, phenomenons. This ignorance rejects useful knowledge such as traditions of imagination and religion, and so it comes off as narrow-mindedness. Wonder has been replaced by a research agenda. So that first, the inherent ignorance, is part of our nature, but then there are ones that are more self-induced and come instead from weaknesses of character. So kinds that you could actually do something about. There's also arrogant ignorance, which is hubris, right? I like how he put it, ungodly ignorance, disguised as godly arrogance. The next one is moral ignorance, the obsession with being objective about everything so you don't ever have to come to any moral conclusions. So basically a person that literally gets off on playing the devil's advocate in every conversation. Oh, well, it is what everything is relative, moral relativists, right? To them, there is no backbone or conviction or having to stand up for things that are good and reject things that are bad and wrong because everything is what you make of it. And it's like, no, some things are bad and wrong. And it doesn't matter how we think of it. They are that way by nature, you know? So then there's polymathic ignorance, the false confidence of knowledge of the past and future, and also self-righteous ignorance, which is the failure to actually really know oneself, flaws and weaknesses and all. And ignorance of oneself and confident knowledge of the past and future are often the same thing. Okay, we have fearful ignorance, which is the opposite of the confident ignorance. So this is when a person willingly keeps themselves ignorant for fear of the strange, fear of the different or of the unknown, fear of disproof, being proved wrong, or of anything unpleasant or tragic knowledge, things that are, harsh truths, which most are. Truth is like a sledgehammer. Truths usually are also very inconvenient. And we now live in a time and a culture where everyone is addicted to convenience now. A frictionless life, right? Also, lastly, a fear of stirring up opposition. So fear of creating any blowback. It can be scary, but so is being a coward, and looking back on your life and realizing that you were a coward for the majority of the time. Okay, now we have lazy ignorance, which is the fear of effort and difficulty, not being willing to understand what is complex or initially maybe a little confusing because I just don't feel like it or I don't have the time is usually the reasons that people will give. And then there's for-profit ignorance, which is maintained by withholding knowledge. So the advertising industry does this a lot. And then there is for power ignorance, which is maintained by government secrecy and lies. So a lot of propaganda that we have to maze through. I find this really helpful to try and sort and understand certain behaviors. In the knowledge portion, he does say that gifts arrive from sources that cannot be empirically located, which is actually so cool. They come from God. To think about where your blessings come from is a fun thing to ponder. So those forms of ignorance, and then if you look into this book, the forms of knowledge he goes into, characterize a personal mind of a human being. But then he starts to get into, there's also the mind of like a corporate mind, which I guess in this day and age, you can also call it the machine. It's being referred to as the machine. It's not just corporate, but it's also political and institutional. And it's just like growing and trying to swallow up everything into it. It's abstract, materialist, reductionist, greedy, and radically utilitarian. It has limitless ability to cause problems that it cannot solve, and that may be actually unsolvable. This mind is ultimately concerned with profit or power. So at one point he says, humans in general have got to worry about the origins of permission we have given ourselves to do large-scale damage. And I am part of this as well. I am trying to scale back my lifestyle and do a proper, minimalism and localize as much as I can. But it's really crazy how hard it can be. He always, throughout this entire book, he always asks such good, deep questions. We had better ask, what is it that we humans need to know? Like, what do we actually need to know? Oh wait, here's a good question. How can we live without destroying the sources of our life? What we are doing to the planet in so many forms. And I'm not a fan of this climate change agenda, but I do know that we are not stewarding the world in a good way. And we are doing immense damage to our beautiful, beautiful creations of God. So even that's kind of like this weird fine line, because the global warming, climate change agenda, the way the machine has made that into something, is very different from kind of what we have to do to start just going local again and being in an intimate relationship with the land and where our things come from. The corporate mind knows no affection, no desire that is not greedy, no local or personal loyalty, no sympathy or reverence or gratitude, no temperance or thrift or self-restraint. It does not observe the first responsibility of intelligence, which is to know when you don't know or when you're being unintelligent. You gotta know when you're being unintelligent. So the beautiful solution, after he goes through all of this, the beautiful solution, he says it's almost laughable, and I agree, is that the eternal answer for all of these problems boils down to humility, a proper humility. Knowing who we are, knowing our place, and acknowledging our human limitations, and stop pushing for and believing in things that want to get rid of them. These God-made limitations are there for a reason. And I'm not talking about human limitations that humans have kind of put there so that they can control. I'm talking about like God's limits that he's put on us as humans, that we constantly need to build the tower again. Constantly building Babel, and then having everything be destructed, and then having to learn again. It's crazy, the cycles. If we find the consequences of our arrogant ignorance to be humbling, and we are humbled, then we have at hand the first fact of hope. We can change ourselves. We, each of us severally, can remove our minds from the corporate ignorance and arrogance that is leading the world to destruction. We can honestly confront our ignorance and our need. We can take guidance from the knowledge we most authentically possess, from experience, from tradition, and from the inward promptings of affection, conscience, decency, compassion, and even inspiration. See, I love him. The next essay, which is also very good, is called The Purpose of a Coherent Community. And some of the quotes that I had written down were moral discomforts that we have taught ourselves not to feel. And then you hear all the time, it takes a village to raise a child. But most people forget that it also takes a local culture and a local economy to raise a village. Putting the pieces back together is going to be slow work. And the pieces can be scattered in a hurry merely by indifference or neglect or violence, but the same forces that scattered them cannot put them back together. For that, we are going to need the hope and the purpose of a coherent community, clearly articulated and steadily borne in mind. We are going to have to resign ourselves to patience and small steps. In the essay Quantity versus Form, he addresses sort of our attitude on death and what it actually means to live a good life, a whole and complete life. For most modern people now, that's living like a long life, but he presents some interesting ways in which maybe that's actually not the goal. Some people don't need to live as long for their life to be whole and complete. Obviously not talking about sudden tragic deaths that will always be mysterious, but like making people live long just for the sake of living a long life. That might not be humane or good. I'm not also advocating for assisted suicide, just to be clear. This insatiable desire for more is the result of an overwhelming sense of incompleteness, which is the result of the insatiable desire for more. So that'll go back also to the vices, right? In my last video, that desire for more constantly, that's kind of a little bit greed, could also be lust, could be gluttony. You gotta pinpoint which one is the one that you have to battle with. Could be shopping addiction. I get so hooked on listening to no-buy videos because it's just nice that so many people are reeling in the beast that is more, that insatiable desire that is rooted in incompleteness, once again. So this one was good because I've been experiencing a little bit of that like digital dementia, that tech-induced brain rot from all the information and scrolling on my phone, the amount of Substack articles, the amount that I take in. But I liked this paragraph. First, let us consider how we have degraded this word, information. As you would expect, in-form-ation in its root meaning has to do with the idea of form, a pattern, structure, or ordering principle. To inform is to form from within. In-form-ation in this sense refers to teaching and learning to the formation of a person's mind or character. But we seem to be using the word now almost exclusively to refer to a random accumulation of facts, all having the one common characteristic of availability. Most of the information that we all get now is free, right? From your Instagram algorithm, from your TikTok, from somewhere on the internet. But at whatever cost this information is made available to its potential users, it arrives unformed and unexperienced. There is nothing deader or more questionable value than facts in isolation. There is nothing deader or of more questionable value than facts in isolation. That hit me so hard because someone brought something up the other day and I had learned something, or I thought I had learned something about it. I had read something or watched a video, but because so much of the information that I've taken in over the last 5 years has been reading on a web page or scrolling through a phone, and then it kind of just goes in. But then because you have so much and because you're not actually interacting with it in real time in certain ways, I just don't retain. I blanked when someone was like, oh, tell me more about that. And I was like, I'm not retaining things because this is the thing. It's just words on a web page and I'm reading them and then I'm kind of like taking them in to note, but there's no like actual engagement that forms, which was crazy to think about. I'm like, man, it really does feel like info glut, like empty calories. And then when a moment presents itself where you could maybe speak about it or pass or share that information, it's like missed. It's like, wow, I just don't remember or know. So that was crazy to read. Think about all of the information that is shaping people's minds and character that they're getting off of TikTok or Instagram from like gurus and people who've just collected info from algorithms. The way that it's spreading, the propaganda and how the propaganda spreads. It's a little bit daunting and overwhelming to think about. Like when I think about that millions of girls, millions of young girls on TikTok are going to use AI to have their astrology charts read and then guide their entire life decisions off of that, I start to feel a little panicked, to be honest. I'm like, oh, that can't be good. That can't have good outcomes, right? And then he also brought up how important conversation is as opposed to just communication, which is like every time you are watching a podcast, even if it's a podcast of a conversation, it's not you actually engaging in a human encounter with another person where you're mutually edifying each other. Communication is kind of just one-sided. Like you watch a video and you can kind of be impacted a little bit, or it can make you think, but conversations like really can change you. Reality is large and our minds are small. So I will end this book review here. I highly recommend encountering the works of Wendell Berry. I think he's a hero. So I will end this video with one of the quotes from the book. Humans don't have to live by destroying the sources of their life. We don't. We can be better, and we can love God more. All right.